A few years ago, I was meeting with a few people in my community to discuss the details of Lou Cree Overcash Westmoreland's still unsolved murder from 1937. One of those people was Shellie Taylor, who works with the Iredell County Public Library. Of course, we immediately began chatting about a few other mysterious stories she had uncovered as part of her work as an archivist. I knew she would be the perfect guest for the podcast, and today I'm sharing a conversation we recently had. We discussed the mysterious case of a woman calling herself Virginia Sneed, who died in police custody in Asheville in 1939. When she was arrested for vagrancy, she refused to tell police her real name. While she was eventually identified by her family in Statesville, many questions about this story remain. We talk about the case of Ruth Horton, whose husband, Fire Captain Leroy Horton, was murdered in 1967 when his truck exploded. Ruth was eventually convicted of conspiracy to commit the murder, even though the actual perpetrators were never tried. We also discuss Shelley's work in cemetery preservation and a new true crime podcast she's helping to develop. I really enjoyed our chat and hope you will too. There is much to love about North and South Carolina, but the two states have also had their fair share of violent and senseless crimes over the years. From murders on the Blue Ridge Parkway, in the heart of big cities or sleepy college towns, and along the coastal waters, some of these stories may be new to you. Some may have happened in your town. Some may involve people that are still missing to this day. But all will leave you remembering to always be vigilant about the people you meet and the places you go. I'm Renee Robertson. Please join me for Missing in the Carolinas. Episode 141, Cold Cases and Crimes from Iredell County, an interview with Shellie Taylor. Shellie Taylor is the local history program specialist at the Iredell County Public Library. She received her BA in Medieval Studies from Penn State and her MA in Library Science from App State. Her blog, mistressofcemeteries.com, tells the stories of those who came before us and highlights the importance of cemetery preservation. She is a historical true crime junkie and will launch a podcast with the library this summer called Crimes of the Carolinas. She is married with a 4-year-old son and 2 fur babies. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shellie.
Thank you for having me.
So are you ready to get started?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you work as a librarian and local history program specialist for Iredell County. Can you give us an idea of what type of work that includes?
Well, being at a public library, we are all about access. So one of the things that we pride ourselves on is being able to allow people to see the records that we have. Our number one priority is going to be digitization and making sure that those digital files are put online in our digital collection so that researchers from across the country, across the world, have access to them. Also participate in a lot of research, and me and my boss both write for newspapers. He writes for the Record and Landmark, and I write for the Iredell Free News. We have a really big readership from that, so we have a lot of people locally that enjoy reading about local history. And then we also do genealogy. We're a huge genealogy resource for researchers. So people coming into the local history room, asking for help, or long distance research requests we'll get multiple times a week. We usually do a little bit here and there of like education. So a lot of our programs are like how to do property research or how to get started with ancestry or something along those lines. So we do programs every month to help people learn the resources that we have. But I would definitely say that the number one priority for our work is to provide access for the information, whether it's through us or online, just to get that information out there that people can grab.
That is something people have no idea is going on in the background, I'm sure.
No, they don't. Everybody thinks public libraries are all about books, and while books are important, and I love books, that's not all that we do. Each department here our adult services department, reference department, everybody offers something different and unique for everybody. The library is for everyone. So it's really a lifeline for a lot of people. And even though something like genealogy just sounds like it's not life or death whether you have access to genealogy research, but there's a lot of people that really appreciate the information that we do have that we've collected over the years.
And sure.
It has helped them with their research a lot.
So speaking of research, you were conducting research for another project when you came across the story of a young woman from Iredell County who called herself Virginia Sneed And as you put it, this sent you down a rabbit hole. Could you tell us more about this story?
Yeah, so I fall down rabbit holes quite often. I'll be researching one thing and then find something else. The newspaper article that I came across for this particular case was from July 15th, 1940, and it was from the local landmark. And it said that the body of Virginia Sneed had been identified months after her death, and that relatives had identified her as 22-year-old Henrietta Coulter of Statesville. I was like, okay, well, why are there two names here? Why didn't we know who she was? Why? So there was a lot of questions there. So all I had was this article to go by. So I said, okay, let me go back and backtrack and see if I can find the original beginning to this story. The landmark said that it was a correspondence out of Asheville. So I started with Asheville newspapers first and just typed in Virginia Sneed in that time period and see what came up. And that's when I fell down the rabbit hole really hard. But I learned that she somehow had gotten to Asheville. And then in November of 1939, she was arrested for vagrancy. I guess that's a term for like loitering, maybe. I'm not 100% sure what that is. But she was arrested and she died in police custody following an epileptic seizure. Dying in police custody was a big red flag for me. I was like, why? A seemingly perfectly healthy young woman dying in police custody. And the fact that she said that her name was Virginia Sneed and she wouldn't give any other information. So I started looking into her a little bit more. And I found her death certificate because I was like, 1939, she's going to have a death certificate out there. And sure enough, it's listed under the name Virginia Sneed. Buncombe County Jail is where she died. And it says under father and mother name, somebody literally typed in, girl would not give any information in regard to herself. Nobody was able to identify or claim her body. So again, my little spidey senses are like, ooh, there's a mystery here. What's happening? So of course I already know who she is because I saw the 1940 article where they're identifying her. So I just went through newspapers chronologically everywhere Virginia Sneed was mentioned and just started printing articles, saving articles, and just trying to build a beginning and an end to this story to figure out who she was, what she was doing in Asheville, why she wouldn't give her name or her information, which I still don't really know why. But it was just a very unique situation. So when I found the end and I was like, ooh, questions, I had to go back to the beginning and then start over with the research and figure out exactly what had happened to her.
I can't tell you how many times I've done that too for this podcast. I'll be looking at one article and then see something across the page about a different murder or some body found or something, and I end up doing the same thing where I start going backwards to try to figure out what happened. It's it's an occupational hazard. What can you say?
Yes, it is. It happens.
So, in addition to the mystery surrounding why Henrietta, Virginia's real name, was in Asheville and what she was doing there, you also uncovered that she was likely married at the time of her death. What did you learn about the relationship between Henrietta and her husband?
So it was, again, a relationship riddled with question marks for me because there was nothing really concrete besides a marriage license. When I started doing the research, I was able to find several marriage records that went along with the story. So I found Henrietta's parents' marriage record. Her mom dies at some point. Her dad remarries. I found that marriage license. So I'm trying to build a story for this family. And so I find this marriage record from October 16th, 1936, and it says Gordon Ball of Turnersburg, North Carolina. So that would be Iredell County. And then it says Henrietta Coulter, Turnersburg, North Carolina. So that's like it's like Harmony area.
Mm.
And it says that he is 21 years old. She's 18. And they got married by a justice of the peace. Pretty cut and dry, simple. So for me, I'm like, okay, 1936. This is only 3 years out from when she is in Asheville and dies suddenly. and she doesn't give her name. She doesn't give her married name or her maiden name. She doesn't mention that she's married. I think one of the newspaper articles mentioned that she was married, but they didn't give the name of a husband. It was just very odd. I feel like if I'm somewhere and I'm in trouble, I'm going to tell people, hey, call my husband, get him out here and to help me. But for some reason, she felt isolated and alone. So I went through and did some more research to try and find anything that I could about her and her husband. And I did find a newspaper article that there's several newspaper articles where Gordon Ball is in some kind of legal trouble. On multiple occasions, I see him in the newspaper for abandonment and non-support of his wife. I see that in 1937 several times, which I would assume would be her. Her name is not listed, but I'm going to assume that it's her because it's only about a year, maybe a little less than a year after they get married. So abandonment and lack of support, I don't know whether that means he just left and moved out and left her alone, or if I don't know what that means. It might have been an antiquated term that I'm not familiar with these days, but I know that he was in there several times for this. And I find him in there several times later after she's gone and he remarries. So he does this to another woman in July of 1940. So around the time that Virginia Sneed's body is being identified as Henrietta Coulter. He's listed in the newspaper for driving drunk, and he drew 5 months on the road and was debarred from the right to operate a motor vehicle for a period of 12 months. So he was arrested for drunk driving around that same time. And in 1941, he's in the newspaper once again and charged with abandonment and non-support of his wife. That can't be Henrietta because she's gone. So he, at some point, gets married to a second woman. And I found his marriage certificate or his marriage license to a second woman. And that would have been, I didn't have an early marriage record. So I have a marriage record for him for another woman in 1953. And I have another marriage license, same county. I think it's the same person filling out the paper because the handwriting is the same for the following year, 1954. So he marries somebody in 1953, marries somebody in 1954. He had to have married somebody after Henrietta because I see him in the paper in 1941 for abandonment issues again. And I'm like, what is happening?
Does this man not have a reputation in the town at this point that you don't marry him?
I don't know. Well, the 1953 and the 1954 marriage licenses are from the county of Lenoir. So
he moved a little further out.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Now the other Iredell County girl, I don't know what her excuse was. I'm like you. I would have been like, stay away.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's got quite the reputation of. And there's actually one newspaper article from November of 1941. And it's literally called Gordon Ball in Lots of Trouble is literally the name of the article. And
wow.
This is again for drunk driving. This involves hit and run driving. And evidence developed later that he was driving a stolen car. So his conscience and his judgment, I guess you could call, very questionable. But yeah, he's a sketchy character, and they get married in 1936. But when she's in trouble in 1939, she doesn't mention him. It's possible he left her 2 years earlier in 1937. But she doesn't even reach out to family either when she's stuck in Asheville. So I'm not really sure what her mental state was at the time.
Yeah, and didn't you say you thought he was younger than the marriage certificate said he was initially?
Yes. In 1936, he's listed as 21 and she's 18. But I later find a World War II draft card that puts his date of birth in 1920, which, if you do the math, would make him 16 at the time he married Henrietta. So I'm not sure whether he lied to make himself older in order to marry. I don't know what the laws were in 1930s to marry. I would assume 18, but I'm not 100%. I mean, my grandmother got married at 16 in 1955, so I guess it's possible.
But I bet he lied to her.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. And his other marriage licenses also have him listed as, one has him listed as 33 and his wife is 37. Not really a big difference. And another one is he's 33 and she's 34. Again, not really a big difference, but yeah, I thought that was very interesting as well, that he seemed to like older women. And
He must have been very charismatic. That's all I'm thinking. Charismatic, maybe attractive.
Maybe. I don't know. But I'm like, you're sketchy, dude.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you and I would see that coming a mile away. But
Yeah.
back then. So you said that when Virginia/Henrietta passed away, basically the whole town of Asheville rallied around to give her this beautiful funeral at the big Episcopal church in downtown, right?
Yeah. They witnesses said that she was, when they arrested her, she was clean and well educated. She was wearing expensive clothing, so it's not like she was a bum on the street. But it claimed that she had good family connections, which again, if she doesn't tell who she is, I don't know how they come to that conclusion that she's got good family connections. You can't know that if you don't know who she is.
Right.
But everybody in the town felt horrible that nobody had come forward to claim her as a family member or say that they knew her. So there was no family to foot the bill for a funeral, but the rector of All Souls Episcopal Church officiated the ceremony, and the church organist came out and played music for the service. People came and placed flowers from the local florist shops at her memorial. She ends up in the county cemetery in an unmarked grave. Obviously, there's no family there to provide funds for a marker. They do end up moving her body once her family in Iredell County realizes who she is. They will exhume her body in Asheville and they will bring it back to Iredell County. But yeah, when they buried Virginia Sneed, nobody really knew who she was. They just saw this pretty young girl, and tragic, she didn't have anybody, so they kind of came out and mourned because nobody else was there to mourn for her.
And how many months was it before her family realized that she had passed away and been buried in Asheville?
So this happened in November of 1939, and the paper that says that she's being identified is July of 1940.
Wow.
So 7-8 months ish, less than a year, but more than 6 months. Yeah, and it's her siblings. Her sister hears about this girl in Asheville, and she thinks that the description sounds similar to her sister, who had gone missing several months before. So she reached out, and I don't remember off the top of my head. I think they might have exhumed her body so the sister could identify it. But of course, 8 months later, I don't know what the body would have looked like. But somehow she was able to identify and say, yes, that's my sister.
Yeah, and it's so sad because if you think about it, it was only, an hour and a half between Statesville and Asheville. But because the technology was not there, we didn't have the news media, we didn't have pictures of people, something like this could fall through the cracks very easily. And really, they weren't that far apart.
No. And in hindsight, I guess it's lucky that the sister even caught wind of a vagrant young woman in Asheville, from several counties away. Because like you said, without social media and without news platforms, it's just happenstance that the sister happened to come across the description of her in the paper.
And did you personally question, like, one of the main things I thought of when I heard this story was, did she have an underlying medical issue that people knew about before she passed away in the jail? Or did she fall and hit her head in the jail and have a seizure? Like, I have so many questions surrounding what actually happened to her.
I do too. It was one of the things that I questioned as well, but I was never actually able to find an answer, so I ended up not putting it in my article that I wrote. I had originally reached out to Buncombe County Sheriff's Office and tried to get a hold of any kind of notes or information on the case, and I told them, I said, I know this sounds weird because it's talking about 1939. Like, I know this is a long time ago. So of course that didn't come to anything. So, but I would have liked to have seen the notes of the officers at the time, because that was my first question too. Was, is there an underlying condition that she might have had? I did see in one of the newspaper articles. Oh, to your question earlier about people trying to identify her body, this newspaper article says that more than 700 people viewed her body in Asheville before it was buried.
Wow.
So more than 700 people walked by trying to see if they could recognize who she was. I can't find that newspaper article. I did read one newspaper article where it said that the family had mentioned that she had an issue of, or a history of, I think they called it fits, maybe, which would make sense for an epileptic. But yeah, that was the only mention that I saw. So I was a little suspicious as well. When I went back and started looking at the beginning, my first thing, I got suspicious of the police officers, which I feel bad about doing. I've got lots of friends who are PD and sheriff's office, but it was just a very odd situation, and the newspapers kept saying how pretty she was. And so, of course, I watched way too much SVU. My SVU brain went, oh my gosh, what happened to her? Did they do something to her? That all came to my brain. But of course, I can't prove any of that, so I don't actually know. And then the family did come out and say that she had some kind of issue medically. So it's more than likely that she just had an epileptic fit and, like you said, probably maybe bumped her head on something. I'm not sure. But yeah, it was a tragic situation all around.
It is, but it's like you said, it's such a fascinating story and one that I had never heard of before. So I thank you for putting that in front of me so that I could learn about it. So when I was doing research for our interview, I discovered that back in February, you developed a presentation at the Iredell County Public Library about women who kill their husbands. One of those women, Ruth Horton, became involved in a fascinating murder for hire case back in 1967. Can you tell us more about that and how you came to discover it in the archives?
Yeah, I actually came across 2 of the 5 women that I talked about in that program around the same time. A friend of mine that does the Abandoned NC blog, Justin, he had done an article on Mary Minish from 1883. And I was like, ooh, that's pretty cool. And then I happened to stumble across one of the other ladies. I don't remember which one it was. And I was just like, for Women's History Month, instead of good things that women have done, let's do notorious women. So I started looking around, and before I knew it, I found 5 women with ties to Iredell County that had killed their husbands. And I was like, this is it. It was extremely popular program. I don't know what that says about the women in Iredell County, but it was a very popular program. But yeah,
they're curious. That's all.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because my pastor's wife actually came to my presentation. And so ever since then, my pastor has always picked on us in the middle of service and been like, okay, well, they got a thing going on. And I think Shelley's telling her how to get away with it. I said, I just gave her options, man. I didn't give her any instructions. What she does is on her. But yeah, it was really funny. So Ruth Horton, 1967, her husband's 1946 Ford pickup truck explodes when he goes to start the ignition. And it actually happened at fire station number 2, which is in West Statesville. And I went to look it up and I was like, where is this? I drive by it every day on my way to work. And I had so now I have a whole different perspective when I drive by. I'm like, ooh, look, that's where that car blew up. But Captain Leroy Horton, he was a fire captain, and he dies in this explosion. I did discover that the couple was separated at the time. They had mentioned in the article was both an article about the bombing and his obituary. At the very end, they had put obituary information in there, and they did mention his kids. And it mentioned that him and his wife were separated at the time. So I went back in the newspapers because sometimes they would put divorce proceedings in the newspapers. So I did find that a few months before this incident happened, that they were in the process of going through a divorce. So my first thought is, if you're going through a divorce, why would you just go through with the divorce? Why you got to kill the guy? But I wasn't involved. But apparently some people who were close to the family said that there was a potential for him to try and get custody of their children, in which case that may or may not have sent her over the edge to go in a desperate direction, I guess you could say. But this happens in November of 1967. In May of 1968, she is arrested and she's indicted for conspiracy to commit murder. Now, you can be charged with conspiracy if you plan a murder, even if that murder does not come to fruition. So if you plan, if you verbalize or put in writing how you plan to murder someone, that is a chargeable offense. So she is indicted on conspiracy, and she tells the story of two men that she met, Robert Lee James and Carl Reuben Deal, and how she basically hired them to kill her husband. Very, very strange situation. Very like back alley. They were meeting in a barn somewhere. I was just like, what is happening? And I'm only gathering this information from newspaper articles, which they always tend to sensationalize things anyway. So you never really know.
Oh, that time period was so notorious.
Really know what's fact and what's fiction. But anyway, so there was this conversation between her and these two men, and they settled on an amount, $2,500, that she would pay in 2 installments. To have.
That's a lot of money too for back then.
Yes, that's a lot of money for now.
Yeah. I mean, where was she getting that kind of money?
I don't know. But yeah, so she agrees to pay these guys $2,500. At some point, there's a meeting between them that goes wrong. She attempts to pull her handgun, but one of the guys gets to his first and basically tells her, back off or I'm going to tell your husband about this plan that you have. And that's when she realizes, she says, you fellows took me in, didn't you? And she tries to demand her money back, but they just laugh at her. And they're just like, no, we've got blackmail over you now. So we're going to keep the money. And if you make a big stink about this, we're going to tell your husband that you hired us to kill him, basically. But they claim that they had no intention of killing him whatsoever. They were just in it to take her money, is what they're claiming. In October of 1968, Ruth is found guilty on the conspiracy charges. She's sentenced to 7 to 10 years. 10 years is the maximum sentence for conspiracy charges. And as late as June 30th of 1969, when this case comes back up in the newspaper, they report that the killer or killers have not been apprehended. And I'm sitting there like, okay, she was charged with conspiracy. And conspiracy just means that you talked about killing someone. You planned a murder. Whether it happened or not, you planned a murder and you're guilty of that crime of conspiracy.
Right. Money was exchanged.
Money was exchanged. Yes, exactly. But yet the two men, James and Deal, never saw charges. They never saw prison time. They never saw any kind of penalty whatsoever. And I'm like, y'all, they planned this murder as much as she did. They took her money, whether they did it or not. That's still conspiracy. And then on the flip side of that, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, his car exploded. And
somebody killed him.
Somebody killed him.
Right.
So technically, this is still an unsolved case. This is a cold case for Iredell County. There was never.
Do you think they gave a deal to those two men if they flipped on her that they wouldn't be charged?
I don't know. I don't know.
Even so, I'm pretty sure she didn't rig a bomb in his truck.
No, I wouldn't think so, but
if she could have, she would have just done it without hiring anybody.
Exactly. And then get herself in trouble for I don't know. It was a very bizarre case because I'm sitting there thinking, he died. Somebody killed him. He didn't rig his own truckload. Somebody did that, whether it was the two guys she hired or if she hired somebody else, I don't know. But I feel like she would have said that. Those two guys took her money. Yeah.
So she didn't say anything about that they actually planted a bomb or rigged any wiring in the truck.
No manner of death was discussed that I know of in the newspapers and their accounts. They did not talk about how they were going to kill him. She just said that she wanted something done with her husband. And the first guy said, you just want us to rough him up. And her response was, no, I want something more than that. And that's when he's like, oh, she wants us to actually kill him. This just got a little bit more serious. But yeah, so and they're the only two guys that she mentioned. So if she hired somebody else, she didn't tell anybody about the third person she has. That's why it's just so bizarre. I'm like, somebody killed him.
It is.
There's nobody getting justice for this situation.
And I'm guessing those two men hightailed it out of town not long after, if I were to guess.
I would assume so. I didn't look for them afterwards. One of them was from Alexander County, which is where I live. So if he went back home, he didn't go very far.
That is the craziest story. And then so she served, 10 years or something?
She was sentenced to 7 to 10. She begins her prison sentence in March of 1970. She puts in a ton of appeals. There's at least 22 complaints about her trial and appeals to try and get a new trial. And then in September of 1974, she was officially discharged. So she really only served about 4 years in prison. And I could not find an obituary for her. So I found her buried at Iredell Memorial Gardens, and she died February 2nd of 2007. But there is nothing in the newspaper that says her family made an announcement of her death. So I don't know how the family dynamics went after that. Kind of a little unclear on that. But yeah, she died in 2007. She's buried at Iredell Memorial.
Yeah, it's so weird looking back at some of these older cases. There are times when women were just vilified in the court system. And you think about if that trial had gone on today, she probably would not have been convicted. Or
I don't think so.
She would have won one of her appeals, because this does not sound like enough physical evidence to sway a jury. But like you said, there was so much sensationalism going on in the media back then. If she had cheated on her husband or anything at any point, that was probably put out there to let everybody know. Then the jury knew about it, and she was just a bad woman. So it's crazy, but I have seen that in other cases before where some women just kind of get off scot-free for stuff like that, and some don't.
Yeah.
And you really don't know why.
The case that I talked about before this one was a 1933, I think. And that one kind of surprised me because that's 30 years prior. So women being mistreated in the 60s, it's even worse in the 30s. She got off scot-free. She was judged by 12 men on a jury, and it was clear evidence that she shot him, and she got off scot-free, didn't serve a day in jail. And I'm like, really? She's clearly guilty. But I don't know. It just depends the way the jury swings.
It really does. You just never know how that's going to go. But I'm sure that presentation was very popular, and I had never heard of that story. So thank you for bringing that to us as well. So with your work as an archivist and a librarian, it's carried over into other passions in your life, including cemetery preservation. Through your blog and Instagram account, Mistress of Cemeteries, you highlight how you believe every burial is a story. Can you share more about how you assisted in locating the Stearns Temple Cemetery recently, which many believed was destroyed by the Statesville Housing Authority?
Yeah. My work with cemeteries has been ongoing for quite some time, but the Stearns Cemetery was one that when I started the Iredell County, we started a countywide cemetery survey in 2022. And it was one of the ones that I just kind of wrote off because we had newspaper articles talking about it being destroyed. I didn't really doubt it. It's a Black cemetery. This would have been 1978. I mean, only about 10 years after the Civil Rights Movement. Racial tension still would have been high. It didn't blow me away that was a possibility. So I just accepted that it was gone. But the more we looked into it, me and my boss, Joel Reese, we were looking into it, and we're like, there's at least 81 burials that we know about from death certificates and newspaper articles. 81. That's a lot. I said, how did somebody come through here with a bulldozer and just say, okay, here it goes, and just bulldoze 81 graves? And Joel's over there going, surely somebody on the crew would have been like religious or Christian and been like, guys, we can't disturb a cemetery. Like, surely somebody stepped up and said something. So then we started talking to some of the people in the community, some of the older people in the community. And we started getting different answers. Instead of, yeah, it's destroyed, we started getting, oh, no, it's still there. When you go over the railroad tracks, it's just right there on the right. Then we talked to somebody else and they'd say, oh, well, yeah, when you go into the neighborhood, just over the railroad tracks, it's on the left-hand side, but you got to go down a ways. Okay. So then we started, I swear we walked every square inch of the Statesville Housing Authority property over there. Went into the woods. We walked behind houses. People living there probably thought we were crazy. We walked along the railroad tracks. We walked everywhere. So we thought. We ended up, I didn't find it. Marcy Sigmund from the city of Statesville had talked to somebody who knew where it was, and she had been shown where it was. So I met them out there one day, and they showed me where it was. And I'm looking, and I'm like, yep, this is it. You can see metal funeral home markers sticking up. There's 2 stones, only one that has writing on it. And according to Find a Grave, the name of that's on the stone supposedly buried at Stearns Temple. There were a couple vocal locals that said, oh, well, that's a different cemetery. Or the cemetery they just moved the cemetery over there, but they still plowed over the rest of it. And Joel and I are like, I don't think that that's a thing. We went out there with a metal detector, and we have since found 21 markers, most of which are metal funeral home markers. Metal funeral home markers don't get moved. If a cemetery gets moved, they might move the stones, but the funeral home markers, they're going to get tossed, if anything. If they're either going to get buried or they're going to get tossed. They're not going to get moved. So the fact that we were digging quite a ways to find some of these metal funeral home markers told us that this is the original site. The housing authority would have had to backfill with dirt in order to place that group of housing that's right there on the outside of the wooded edge where the cemetery is. So after 40 years of weather and erosion, it's extremely possible that the dirt just washed out and washed down, because we were digging almost a foot to get to some of these funeral home markers, which is not normal. Funeral home markers sit on top of the ground. So I think maybe where the rumors came from that the graveyard was bulldozed over or covered up, I don't think it's entirely false. I think that with the backfill, there were probably more graves that they didn't know about or were unmarked that got covered up. And I think that just 40 years of erosion kind of covered up what was left of that cemetery. But I think it's in its original position, its original location. It just got lost and forgotten over time.
Now, my question is the Stearns Temple still standing?
No. So the Stearns Temple was started by migrants from Georgia.
Okay.
C.A. Stearns was a big housing developer in the 1920s, and he recruited a lot of Blacks who were looking for work out of Georgia. The odd thing about that is there were plenty of African Americans living in Statesville who also needed work. So we do not know why he reached out to people from Georgia. And there was always a little bit of tension between those groups. The Blacks from Georgia were not treated well by the Blacks who were native to Statesville. There was a little bit of animosity there. The Statesville natives thought they were taking their work, which isn't false. So we're still not 100% sure where the Georgia connection came from, but there was some tension there. So this community was a marginalized community within an already marginalized community. So they were even considered outsiders among the other African Americans. They brought with them their religion, which would have been a CME church. Back then it was called the Colored Methodist Episcopal. It is now called the Christian Methodist Episcopal. It is now called Holsey Memorial. It's the only CME in all of Iredell County, but it originally started as Stearns Temple. It was named after the man who brought them here to work and who gave them land for the church and for the cemetery, but it did not remain that name for very long. It's in the Sanborn maps as Holsey as early as 1930. So it has been Holsey for a long time, and Holsey Memorial is still an active church here in Statesville.
Now, you have a pretty lengthy article on your blog. I can link that so people can learn more about it in the show notes about this whole adventure that you went on. I read it. but I think everyone else would be really interested in reading it too. So I'll link that if you don't mind.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's
That's
got
part of the reason
photos,
why
I
we do
think.
what we do.
Yeah. And also I think you had some videos about it on your Instagram account, Mistress of Cemeteries.
Yeah, Instagram and my TikTok as well. I had a guy, Frederick Murphy, who does the History Before Us blog. And he came up from Charlotte and interviewed me and Joel about the Stearns Temple. And so he posted those videos on his YouTube channel and Instagram and TikTok. And then I did some videos with him. So we did a little bit of collaboration on that just to kind of get the word out there, because Black cemeteries are hard to find. They're hard to confirm a lot of times. And they're disappearing very quickly. So it's a priority to get the word out there that they exist and to tell the story of the people who started these churches.
Yeah, it's a very important work. So this summer, you and a few other librarians are launching your own podcast called Crimes of the Carolinas. Can you tell us a little more about what you'll be covering in your show and what listeners can expect?
Yeah, I'm super excited. We're getting ready to record our first episode that will hopefully be coming out in June. It's going to be historical crime. So that's my thing. I could sit there and read true crime all day long, but if it takes place in like the 1800s and it's true crime, sign me up. I'm all there. We might not go that far back for some things, but I figured we discussed it and said probably 1985 would be as far as we really want to go. A lot of true crime documentaries are covering 80s and 90s, like serial killers and stuff like that. So I don't really want to go that far with it. But 1985 and earlier is what we're going to try and focus on. We are going to focus on Iredell County and the surrounding counties here, obviously, because that's my job, local history. But we are going to also focus on Western North Carolina. There was a lot of stuff going on in Western North Carolina. The mountains were a very uninhabited place for a very long time, especially even going back as far as the Civil War. Like there were a lot of raging family tensions during the Civil War. One of the episodes that we're hopefully going to talk about is actually my husband's fourth great grandfather, who was murdered by his own brother because of Union and Confederate brother dividing brother against brother, basically. So we've got some really cool inside stories from the mountains. We might go to the entire state as well, but I'm a mountain girl, and so I love stories that come out of Western North Carolina. So it's going to be really exciting. But the first episode is going to cover Mary Minish, which I mentioned earlier, her 1883 murder of her husband, and Netta White Harrison, who is another woman who killed her husband in 1912. Both of those women suffered from a lot of mental health issues. So we're going to focus on the mental health industry at those times that the women had committed their crimes, maybe how they could have been prevented, but then their care afterwards, after they were found guilty. And then the second episode I'm really excited about, it is going to take place in the 1930s. Allegheny County, which borders Virginia and has the Blue Ridge Parkway that goes through it, right around the time that the Blue Ridge Parkway was getting put into Allegheny County, 16-year-old Elva Brannick goes missing and her body's discovered 4 days later. And it's the only unsolved case out of Allegheny County. And I normally don't like unsolved cases because I am a creature of resolution. I want to know what happened. I do not want to just have to sit there and be like, what happened? Where'd they go? Who killed them? So me and my partner who's doing the podcast with me, Dottie, we're going to come up with a suspect list based on all of the information that we've found and all the research that we've done. We're going to come up with different suspects. And then at the end, I'm going to be like, I think so-and-so did it. And she's going to say, I think so-and-so did it. And we'll ask our listeners to participate and see what they think, the solution could have been. But like you said earlier, 1937, there's no DNA testing. They sent DNA off to Washington, D.C. to be tested by the FBI. So I would love if at some point somebody could get their hands on that case file and run some familial DNA, which has been used to solve lots of crimes recently. So I think that there could be a solution if somebody attempted to do it.
So did they get DNA off her dress or her clothing?
They got DNA from her, and they also got DNA from one of the suspects. He had blood on his underwear, and the FBI confirmed that it was human blood. But it didn't go any farther than that. so they didn't find it relevant to the case.
Yeah.
Understand that. So yeah, so that's one of the things that we'll be discussing. So we're going to have a big variety of different types of cases. Some of them might just be missing cases. Some of them might be murder cases. Some of them might be white collar crimes. I'm looking forward to learning about, because that's not normally my thing, but I'm looking forward to seeing how locals have been in trouble for embezzling over the years and maybe conspiracies in small town Western North Carolina. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what I can learn and then share with our listeners.
Yeah, I can't wait. That's going to be exciting. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a lot of information. I know the listeners are really going to enjoy it. Where can people find you again online with your work?
Well, my blog is mistressofcemeteries.com. You can also find me on Instagram. You can find me on TikTok, and you can find me on Facebook. The library also has, Iredell County Public Library has an Instagram and a Facebook page. And when I post a blog for the podcast, it'll be on the library's website, and our socials will forward that out to everyone as well. And there's also a way on the library's website that you can sign up to receive newsletters, and you can select the Crimes of the Carolina podcast. So if you want updates or want to know when the latest episode has aired, all that kind of stuff, there's options to do that on our website as well.
Okay, cool. Well, Shellie, thanks again. This has been great, and we hope to hear more from you soon.
Thank you so much, Renee. I appreciate it.
This brings us to the conclusion of this episode of Missing in the Carolinas. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd also like to support the show in a small way, you can buy me a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com, Renee Robertson. Thank you so much for those who have already supported me through this platform. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people and crimes profiled on the show. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. Sound editing is provided by Daniel Robertson. Thanks so much for listening.